Hello everyone, my name is Duran Hafiz. I'll be your host for today. I welcome you to today's session on the rights and liberty of the intellectually challenged. Today's event is organized by Students for Liberty Sri Lanka in collaboration with HYPE Sri Lanka. Students for Liberty is a pro-libertarian organization that works to educate, develop, and empower the next generation to a freer future. HYPE Sri Lanka is a youth empowerment incubator which strives to streamline the youth development system through a shifting of dependence on the conventional bottom to top approach of youth development. Moving on, I'd like to introduce you to our speaker, woman of the hour, Ms. Lasanthi Daskon. She is the Deputy Country Director for the International Foundation for Electoral Systems in Sri Lanka. She's an attorney at law with a background in human rights and has over 15 years of experience to promote the empowerment of marginalized groups. Through her work with IFES, she also supports the Elections Commissions of Sri Lanka. Lastly, Ms. Lasanthi is a visiting lecturer at the Department of Disability Studies, Faculty of Medicine, University of California. Thank you for joining us today, Ms. Also, just before we start, guys, I just wanted to give you all a slight brief. So basically, Ms. Lasanthi will speak first, and then we'll have a 30-minute Q&A session, during which you all will be allowed to ask a question. So up until then, please mute your audios and videos, guys. Ms. Lasanthi, you can now take over. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, Dura. Thank you, HYPE team and Students for Liberty for giving me the opportunity. It's indeed an honor. And I'm really inspired. I'm really thankful to all of you for organizing this, because this is the topic of the rights of persons with intellectual disabilities is not often spoken about. It is not one of the main topics that even in the disability discourse that comes up, especially in countries like ours in the global south. So it is a great opportunity. It's a great beginning. And then I must tell all of you that my presentation will be very brief. I'm not presenting any theoretical aspects. I will only be giving you a basic outline, and then we will go into the discussion so that we together will be able to explore the challenges and the opportunities. Thank you, and Dora, I would thank you to share the slides, please.
Sure, I'll go ahead and share it.
Yes. Please excuse me, I will be drinking my tea while making the presentation just to keep my throat moist.
That's all right.
Yeah. So, okay. So if you go to the first slide, so who are these people with intellectual disabilities that we are talking about? Usually, especially in the United Nations language and in the United Nations documents, people with intellectual disabilities and people with mental health or psychosocial disabilities are spoken of together. But today, for this presentation, I have extracted only the rights and the issues of people with intellectual disabilities, because that is the topic of our conversation. So if we are to look at firstly how the world mostly still sees people with intellectual disabilities, it is a perspective of non-personhood. People with intellectual disabilities are recognized as individuals, yes, but not as persons, because throughout history, people with intellectual disabilities have been under guardianship and care. So why are people with intellectual disabilities not considered person? Mainly because they don't fall into the standard or the stereotypical definition of what a person is. So what is this person we are talking about? When we talk about disability, we talk about the perfect human being, because we all are diverse. Being human, we are diverse. But when people who the so-called normal, quote unquote, or the non-disabled community looks at a person with a disability, it comes from a position of power, position of perfect formation of the human body. So here, in terms of persons with intellectual disability, the main reason why they are not considered persons is because they're supposed to be lacking narrative coherence. What is narrative coherence? It is the ability to narrate something, tell a story in an orderly fashion, right? Give a resolution, give time and date and place information. This is the basis on which this personhood is judged or decided by the non-disabled community or the society at large. So because of this, people with intellectual disabilities are decided by the others not to meet this presumed test of personhood, and because of that, they are considered as individuals who cannot freely contract, who cannot rationalize, who are not autonomous agents. So and then personhood is usually equated only with the demonstration of decision-making capacity, and despite legal cases all over the world to the contrary. Next slide, please. And in the United Nations, in one of the United Nations reports, it says that persons with intellectual disabilities are among the most marginalized, vulnerable, and excluded groups in society. Obviously, isn't that so? Because you're denied of your personhood to begin with, and then when a human being is denied of personhood, then they're obviously marginalized. They're not considered, if I may use the word, worthy enough to be part of the so-called quote unquote normal society. And then because of this, they face various forms of social and cultural stigma. They're discriminated, and their barriers include civil, political, economic, so all of these barriers that we usually talk about when we come to people with disabilities, but then more severe maybe than some forms of other disabilities. And they do not receive adequate and quality services, especially in countries like ours, that support their independent living. And the main barrier, once again, stigma and discrimination. And in countries like ours, also because we don't have CRPD compliant legal frameworks, people with intellectual disabilities do not have adequate legal protection based on rights-based frameworks, and not even policies that support their progress. And added to that is the inadequacy, because we are always financially lacking in countries like ours. Financial resources are very limited. So in situations like that, then the financial and human resources that are required to provide a better life for people with disabilities in general, but also people with intellectual disabilities particularly, becomes a problem. And then this hinders progress in general. So if you're going to, because I spoke about the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, if you go to Article 1 of the convention itself, it recognizes intellectual disability in the beginning itself. It basically says, look here, people with disabilities are part of society. They have to, the convention's purpose is to promote and protect and ensure the full and equal employment, human rights, fundamental freedoms for all persons with disabilities. And this includes persons with disabilities who have long-term physical, mental, intellectual, or sensory impairment. So it had been specifically, mental and intellectual disabilities have been specifically mentioned in the CRPD. And from there, the CRPD goes into Article 12, sorry, I will also, okay, since we spoke about the CRPD, I will also, maybe thank you, Dura. Okay, we'll go to that and go back to the DOJ slide, sorry. So, thank you. I'm sorry for the confusion, everyone. You can leave it. You can leave it. Thank you.
All right,
Yes.
okay, sure.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, no, it's my mistake. I have mixed up the slides. So in Article 12, it specifically says that persons with disabilities have the right to be recognized as persons before the law, not non-persons. They are persons, individuals with rights, individuals who have the same rights as anyone else, anyone without a disability. And they should also be able to enjoy full legal capacity on an equal basis with others in all aspects of life. And when we go down, we will understand why this legal capacity is being spoken specifically about in the CRPD. And also the CRPD says, state parties shall take appropriate measures to provide access by persons with disabilities to the support they may require in exercising their legal capacity. Keep in mind this word support, and then we will go to the next slide, Article 13. Sorry, Article 14. Is it the third? Okay. Okay, we can skip this. Okay. So in Article 14, it also talks about the liberty of persons with disabilities. So states parties shall ensure that persons with disabilities on an equal basis with others enjoy the right to liberty and security of person. Remember this right to liberty. The right to liberty which we all have, whether we are disabled or not, should also be enjoyed by people with intellectual disabilities, and they should not be deprived of their liberty unlawfully or arbitrarily, and that any deprivation of liberty is in conformity with the law. Any deprivation of liberty should be in conformity with the law, and that the existence of disability shall not in any case justify this denial of liberty. So in countries, it also says that state parties shall ensure that if persons with disabilities are deprived of their liberty through any process, they are on an equal basis with others entitled to guarantees in accordance with international human rights law and shall be treated in compliance with the objectives and principles of the CRPD. So it's very important for us to remember this, because Sri Lanka, among other countries, in 2017, ratified the CRPD and agreed to make laws, legal frameworks in compliance with the CRPD. If we may go back to the DOJ slide, Dora. Okay, so the DOJF is the Disability Organizations Joint Front of Sri Lanka. In 2017, they submitted a report as part of the Universal Periodic Review of states parties to the convention. And there they highlight that in Sri Lanka, persons with intellectual disabilities and those with severe disabilities are frequently denied enjoyment of their most fundamental human rights and participation in society, notwithstanding any of the policies that we already have in this country. Thank you. Right. We can go. Yes, okay. So when we started this conversation about the presentation, one of the things the HYPE team asked me was if there's any law that denies people with intellectual disabilities the right to participate. To be honest, there's no specific law that denies, but nor is there any law that guarantees the equal enjoyment of rights and liberties by persons with intellectual disabilities. So they are mostly deprived of civic engagement, mainly because of stigma, misunderstanding, and discrimination that is coupled with these things. And these things prevent in Sri Lanka the full and effective participation in society by persons with intellectual disabilities. Next one. Yes. So a few of the issues, only a few of the issues. To begin with, so we spoke of stigma. When a child with any type of disability, but especially intellectual disability is born, they are deprived of this personhood from birth itself. I have heard numerous stories from parents where they say the moment the child is born, the doctors themselves, mind you, the medical professionals themselves, not only doctors, any medical professional who is there, would advise the parent to give up the child because the child is quote unquote useless and make another child. So this is not, this is fact. This happens so often. And this itself explains, I think, very well what the situation in our country is. I'm sure there is progress that is being made as we speak, but this is still the situation for majority of the people. And then this stigma, I mean, can you imagine the level of stigma if the medical professionals themselves live with this kind of stigma? Can you imagine what these parents would face for the next years to come with an child with an intellectual disability, whom they have to bring up in such a discriminatory environment? So the family, the neighbors, the friends, the professionals, no one would give them the proper advice. No one would give them the proper required support. And then they'd always treat this child, regard this child as a non-person, quote unquote, a useless person. And because of this, what is the next stage? We talk about universal primary education. We talk about access to education, right to education, all of that. But the majority of children with intellectual disabilities are deprived of an opportunity to get an education. This is, in most cases, majority, the opportunity to be part of the inclusive education system. Some receive the opportunity to enter into either segregated schools or segregated classrooms in mainstream schools. But again, in this environment, they are denied of, again, the personhood. Because this classroom, if I may just go into a bit of practical details, this classroom, say in a mainstream school, is a classroom that no one else visits, no one cites. I have heard stories where teachers who are expecting babies, expectant teachers, are asked not to go near the special education classroom because it is not good for a pregnant woman to see imperfect, quote unquote, children, lest they may also give birth to imperfect children. So this is the level of stigma. They're part of a mainstream school, but they're denied of equality, they're ridiculed, they're not considered human, they're not considered equal. So this is just the beginning of the education system. This is just a little bit of, I mean, insight into what it is within the education system. There's so many issues, but this is just as an example. So they're left out of education, and those who are, if I may use the word fortunate, those who have parents who are more understanding, who have the capacity, are able to somehow bring these children forward, give them some kind of opportunity and give them some sort of independence. But this only a handful. This is only a very few if you consider the number of people with disabilities in the country. So because of this, now you're denied of personhood from the time you're a baby itself. You're denied of an opportunity to get an education. You're considered an unperson, imperfect human being, inadequate, not able to do anything independently. So they are, and then throughout their life, they're denied the right to live independently. And then when they come of age, when they become adults, most of the children with intellectual disabilities, people with intellectual disabilities, are denied of their sexual and reproductive rights. They're not given the opportunity to socialize. They're not given the opportunity to find partners. They're not seen as attractive. And worse is that they become subjects of sexual abuse and exploitation. This is very common. This is very common in any part of Sri Lanka where children with intellectual disabilities are sexually abused, sexually harassed, and then because the legal systems are not accessible to them, and also because they haven't been given the opportunity to be independent and to make independent choices for themselves, the ability to resist or ability to go and give evidence on the incidents that happen to them is lacking, so that they are completely denied of their legal right. They're completely denied of justice. And also another problem is all of this. And then also there's the problem of denial of the opportunity to obtain gainful employment. So this is only a few of the issues, not all the issues, but then I think it sums up, it makes you understand the length and breadth of this issue in a country like ours. Next one, please. Yes. So in 2004, WHO had a convention in conference in Montreal, and then they published this declaration called the Montreal Declaration, which speaks about persons with intellectual disabilities. It says that people with intellectual disabilities should be supported to make their choices and decisions, to communicate, and then to have them respected. Accordingly, where individuals have difficulty making independent choices and decisions, laws and policies should promote and recognize supported decision making. States should provide the services and the necessary support to facilitate persons with intellectual disabilities in making meaningful decisions about their own lives. So what this basically says is, people with intellectual disabilities need to be given the support that they require, the reasonable accommodation that they require in order for them to make independent decisions. So what does this mean? What does this mean in reality, in practical sense? When you say supported decision making, one of the things that we say, because I work on elections and we work on electoral inclusion of people with disabilities, it's as simple as this, right? Let's say we have an adult with an intellectual disability who needs to go and vote. For him or her, let's say it's a her, she needs information. What is the information that is already available, say for example, in the website of the Election Commission of Sri Lanka? It's detailed, it's very legal, it's very technical, and say how to vote. How do you vote? How do you, what is the ballot paper? How to vote? Even that information is very detailed, is very complex, and it's very difficult for anyone to understand. So people with intellectual disabilities, what we are asking for is the Election Commission to provide this information in simplified formats. Do not say that people with intellectual disabilities do not have the capacity to vote. They do not have the capacity to make their own decisions and go and vote, make an independent choice about whom they should vote for. Give the information in accessible formats, give the information in pictures, give the information in simple language. This is all we ask for. And then this becomes, and say Election Commission can even give explanations, demonstrations. So these are things that this is actually what supported decision making is. You are supporting a person to make an independent decision. You're giving information in an accessible format. This is not only for disability. This applies for anyone. In our lives, we make supported decisions. We don't make decisions on our own. The level of support we get, the level of support we receive is different to our social status, our level of education, our level of access to information, all of this. So the information we receive is dependent on these factors. So if you want to get people with disabilities into the mainstream, if you want to make society equal and inclusive, give information in accessible formats, help them in making supported decisions. So this is what the basis of this is. This is what we are asking governments to do. This is what should be considered. This is what should be explored, especially in countries like that, countries like ours. And then also some of these things, I mean, I mentioned finances, but then some of these things do not even cost anything extra than what you're already spending on, say, on elections. So this is just an example. I think with that, I will stop. Dura, slides are over, right?
Yeah,
okay, so we can go to the questions and take the discussion forward. Thank you.
So well, I'll just be reading the questions on the screen and then you can go ahead and answer them. Also, some of these questions may be repetitive, so maybe you can just elaborate on them.
Yes.
So the first one is, does a person with an intellectual disability have different rights or treatment under the Sri Lankan law?
So no one has different rights in any law. We all have, as humans, as human beings, we are all born equal. And as citizens, we should all have the same rights and liberties in a country. So persons with intellectual disabilities also have the same rights as any other person without a disability does. They are, of course, treated differently because, right, this question has two parts. Different rights. No, different rights. Neither do we have rights that support them, rights that provide them the laws that provide them accommodation. That is not special provisions. We do not have special provisions that protect them. We know that they're deprived. We know that they're denied of their rights, but we know that there is no special provisions in the Sri Lankan legal framework that protects them or accommodates them, gives them reasonable accommodations to live independently in Sri Lanka. The treatment, so the law does not give special treatment, but say, for example, again, going back to the electoral legal framework, if a person with an intellectual disability comes to the polling center to vote, he or she cannot be turned back because nowhere in the elections law it says that a person with an intellectual disability cannot vote. What happens most often is the poll workers, the polling center officials, turn them back, saying that how can this person vote? this person does not have the capacity to make an independent decision. His or her decision may be influenced by the parent or whoever, or the guardian. So we cannot let this person vote. This is what happens. So basically they are denying them a right with no legal basis at all. But on the other hand, we also know that there are certain persons with intellectual disabilities who go and vote specifically based on this premise that no one can deny them the right. The law does not deprive them of the right. Yes.
What is the current status of independent living of persons with intellectual disabilities? What is Sri Lanka lacking the most?
Okay, so like I mentioned, guardianship, continued guardianship is a huge issue. So if a person with an intellectual disability lives with his or her parents, then the parents will act as that person's guardian as long as the parents are alive. And then the fear of the parents, if you look at the DOJF report also, what it says is the parents live in constant fear as to what would happen to their children with disabilities once they are no more around to look after them. So the parents do not have to worry about this if we had systems and if we had mechanisms that provided for independent living. So this is about the persons who are living in households. But then the other major issue is people with intellectual disabilities are most often, children with intellectual disabilities are most often kept in, institutional care. So when they are in institutional care, they live their entire life in these institutions, no independence, no rights and liberties, no social interaction, no social cultural rights. They're not considered persons at all. And in most instances, in the most deplorable conditions. So this is the problem. This is the main problem in Sri Lanka. And I must say this is yet an unaddressed issue because nobody speaks openly about these things. It is very difficult also to speak openly about these things because the stigma is so much within the disability community itself. I will give you this does not relate to actually independent living, but then decision making back again. But I will give you an example of an experience I had last year when I was doing some voter education programs for disabled people's organizations. And in one of those workshops, we were talking about everybody's equal right to access, equal right to access the electoral process. And there was a person with a disability, a wheelchair user, who said to me, but we should not give these people with intellectual disabilities the right to vote because voting is an informed, so in Sinhala, it was like, you have to have some form of intelligence to be able to vote. This is one of the biggest problems in this country, because people who are not intelligent are given the right to vote. So we should not give people with intellectual disabilities the right to vote. So I had to fight it. I had to argue it and explain that if people with intellectual disabilities are given the opportunity to obtain information in accessible formats, then they have the ability to make informed decisions. So this is the situation in Sri Lanka. Just to give it in a nutshell.
Quality education is a basic right for all children. Yet the discrimination in Sri Lanka results in denying these children from this. What is your take on this?
Okay, so I think we already spoke of this, Dura. already when I spoke about education. So, but if anybody has any questions on, because see, in one of our, in a few of our research projects, these are the things that we also worked on: access to education by children with disabilities.
Okay.
So there are multiple factors. It's not only the school education, demand-driven school education system. It's not only the lack of peer support or the ignorance of the teachers, stigma and discrimination. There is also the aspect of family, the internalized stigma of parents, beliefs that hinder the participation of children in education. So all of these things. And also when we talk about human resources and financial resources, our schools are not equipped to support children with intellectual disabilities, because as I said, there needs to be support in a mainstream classroom. Say for example in Sri Lanka, where there are about 40 children in a classroom, it's already difficult for one teacher to handle these 40 children on his or her own. And then if you also have to give accommodations to a few students, then it becomes so challenging. It becomes humanly impossible for one teacher to do. So there are no supported teachers in these classrooms. There are no financial resources to give accessible formats to children who require that. Say for example, our textbooks are so heavy, they're so content heavy. So do we have simplified formats of the same information? We don't. So these are all part of this bigger problem.
Since this question was already answered, maybe I can put a second part to it. What do you think is the ideal scenario in this case? How would you expect it to be?
Okay, how I would expect it to be is, so I'm an advocate for inclusive education at all times. I don't make reservations when I talk about inclusive education, but I also understand fully the challenges of inclusive education. So what we have to do, so the ideal situation should be inclusive education. Every child with or without disability is in the same classroom, learning the same things, given the same opportunities. And that our education is not so demand driven. It looks at refining the skills. If we had an education system which refined the skills, then this issue would be much less complicated. So that is my ideal situation. I know it's not practical, but it is the goal that we have to achieve. It is the goal that we have to keep working towards.
So, say in a scenario where a teacher has an intellectually disabled child in her or his classroom, how do you think she should make sure that the child is more involved? How do you think the other kids' parents should behave? I mean, like make sure that this child is welcomed.
Yeah.
And not.
So this is where awareness and training comes in, right? Because say the teachers will have to have special training on this, because not every teacher can do that, because it also has to be done in a professional manner, in an accessible manner. So these things have to be taught to teachers. Teachers have to be trained, and teachers definitely have to have support. Right? Not a single teacher cannot handle this on his or her own. And in terms of parents, and we know that in schools, parents, sometimes parents, if they are past pupils of the school or something in Sri Lanka, they have more influence over the classroom formation or who gets into the class, whatever. So we know instances where parents of non-disabled children have come and asked the teachers to remove the child with a disability because their own child is unable to get a proper education because the child with the disability disturbs them, right? So this is very common. So this is a problem of stigma. This is a problem which needs to be addressed through awareness, because majority of this country does not know that all of these things, disabilities or non-disabilities, our behaviors, everything can be managed. So managing your disability, providing, not managing your disability, but then managing the outcomes of, say, your behavior, or the accommodations that are required is what is needed to make it inclusive. This understanding that disability is not something that is unusual, that you have to accept, you have to accommodate. So these are things that have to come from awareness. Very, very strong sensitization measures have to be taken in order for society to understand this.
Right. Okay. What are your thoughts on special schools? I mean, nowadays we have some of these, popping up, and then their parents decide to send them to these. How do you think it affects this child's, personality or behavior or anything of that?
Yeah. So it's like this. The argument is that something is better than nothing, right? It's better to have special schools than not giving any education at all to children with disabilities. But the problem with special schools is that it's segregated. It gives the children no opportunity of socializing, making friends with society. And you're in a special school for, say, 10 years, and you go out into the society, you don't get to hang out with people who have the same disability as you. You go into a society of diverse disabilities, people who do not have disabilities. And then how does that affect? That stigmatizes a person more, because the person doesn't know how to interact with the so-called normal society. That is a big problem. And then the other thing is, sorry.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. No, the other thing is, in special schools, you put children with diverse disabilities in one group and try to give one uniform set of one uniform set of methods, which is not practical, because disability, as we know, is diverse, and intellectual disability is also very diverse, and the accommodations that are required for each individual is different. So if these are not met, then it becomes a problem. And then by keeping children with disabilities segregated in separate schools or separate classrooms, we separate them more. We give the message to society saying that, okay, they're different. They shouldn't be with the others. They should be kept separately. They should be given separate facilities, or whatever they call special needs. They should be given quote unquote special needs. So, and then they're separate. They're not part of our mainstream society. So the message itself is wrong.
Thank you for that, Miss. Finally, companies continue to view the intellectually disabled as liabilities. How to eradicate this mentality?
Okay, so when you say companies, you mean the companies that hire them? Is that what you mean? Okay.
It can be
okay.
Public firms.
Yes. So the thing is, in the government sector, you don't get the opportunities at all, mainly because of the lack of education, or that you are not considered worthy of giving a job, all of that. And in the private sector, we do see an increasing number of individuals with intellectual disabilities being hired. It's good. It's a very good trend. It gives them the opportunity of independent living, gainful employment, socializing, becoming a part of society, being a productive human being, all of that. So for the companies, it is because if they think of people with disabilities as a liability, it is because they are not hiring these people for the right reasons. They're hiring them for the wrong reasons. They're hiring them for tokenism, right? So it is challenging. I know if you haven't interacted with a person with a disability in all your life, and then suddenly you have to manage a person with a disability, say as the manager of a company, then it's challenging because you don't know you also try to tiptoe around the person with a disability, right? You don't know what to do, what not to do, what work to get done, what work not to get. So again, this goes back to the problem of not being sensitized enough about disability. Because if you're sensitized enough about disability, and if you're not looking at it from a power angle where I think of myself as non-disabled and more powerful and more capable, and if I think of the person with a disability as less capable and to be pitied on, then obviously then I tend to be very careful. It comes from a good place, but the wrong attitude, right? You don't have to tiptoe around disability. This is the problem. I have spoken to people from the corporate sector who have confessed this, because they're worried that they'll, you know, offend or say the wrong thing. But then you don't have to. One part of making a society disability inclusive is to be very comfortable around disability. If you have questions, you ask, you clarify for it. You don't ask offensive questions that offend a person. You don't ask questions that offend a person, even if you are a person without a disability. We do in Sri Lanka. We do. I mean, like, why are you fat? I mean, that's a very common question, right? So, so it's like, oh, you have put on weight. Why? Okay, very person. So it's the same principle that you have to apply. Don't offend. Don't ask personal questions. If you have a person with a disability, don't ask how you became disabled unless that person tells you, right? Just treat that person as you would treat anyone else, but make the accommodations that are needed. Then it doesn't become such a tedious task. Right? Don't make it tedious. Don't overdo. Make it quote unquote very normal, and then it becomes very easy.
How do you think firms can actually improve? I mean, besides providing the necessary facilities, what else can they do to actually be inclusive?
I think one of the main things, like especially the corporate sector can do, is to first sensitize. Because you have to first sensitize your staff. First, you have to understand what disability is. You have to develop an inclusive mindset. And then if you hiring people with disabilities is very good, but not for your CSR's sake, not to tell the world that you are this amazing company that hires people with disabilities and we have these tokens who we display, we showcase, because you want to give them the opportunity, and because you are committed to inclusion, and you believe that inclusion is very important, and you believe that people with disabilities should be given the same opportunities, and that you're committed to make the required accommodations in consultation, not the accommodations that you think they should be given. Say, for example, I would take a different example, not intellectual disability, but say if you have a person who is blind in your workplace, you don't necessarily have to assist the blind person all the time to go to, say, use the washroom. You just make the washroom accessible. You make the workspace accessible. You provide accessible software for that person to be able to work independently and make that person independent within your space. So making a person independent within your space, again, coming back to the point where they are able to survive without you, without your support. The systems have to be set up so that that person is independent, that person is able to move independently, make decisions independently, and make a valuable contribution, and to improve and to be worthy of that, to give those people self-worth. So that is what they should be committed to.
Okay. Finally, what is the insanity clause and how does this affect individuals with intellectual disabilities?
Okay, so it's good that you asked this. We did speak about this earlier also, because we get this insanity clause confused with intellectual disabilities. Insanity clause, as it applies in Sri Lanka, applies mainly to say in the penal code offense, in criminal offenses, it is to deny deny criminal liability, right? Deny the responsibility, to say this person is declared insane, if I may use the word, because of that he or she had no knowledge or consciousness of the act, and that is taken as an excuse, if I may use the simple language. In civil matters, it is used to deprive people of their civil rights, say property rights. You can get a court to declare that a person was unsound of mind, and because of that he or she does not have the ability to manage properties. This is unfortunately used in Sri Lanka in property matters, where say you have a sibling who is not married, and you want to deprive that person of the right to property, and then you file a case, and then you get a court declaration saying this person is not able to manage property, is unsound of mind. Because of that, he or she should be not be given the equal share of the property that is his or her inherent right. In terms of the elections law, if a court has declared a person is of unsound mind, if that certification is produced in the polling center to the election commission or to the election commission, that person can be denied of the right to vote. This is wrong. This is I'm just explaining the law. I'm not saying it's right. It's a completely wrong, archaic law that we have to change. This insanity clause has to be taken off. But what I'm also trying to say is this cannot be taken in relation to persons with intellectual disabilities, because these two are completely different. We do get this mixed up, and people are denied of their rights because this gets mixed up, but these are two completely different things.
Right, okay. Thank you for answering all our questions. Well, the floor is open to everyone. So guys, go ahead, unmute yourselves, and yeah. Anyone, any questions? Neha, I think you had a couple.
Yeah, I was just trying to raise my hand, but you called me. Okay.
Go ahead.
Good evening, ma'am. It was great listening to everything that you said. And Dura, congratulations. It was really a new topic and very intriguing topic, So,
Thank you.
whatever ma'am said, I like thoroughly I was just very, amused from it that, this happens actually, right? But then she talked on a very broad level. I'm just like looking, I have a couple of friends whose family members are disabled, intellectually disabled.
Right.
And what happens is that whenever we are sitting together, just hanging out, and if they want to, like, they want some help, then if I go on, then they will be like, until when will you be helping him or helping her, right? Let's say if someone has like got a fracture from playing football, and then when he or she asks people for help, they go on immediately and help them out, right? But when same thing happens to a disabled person, they are not willing to help them, right? Even in the case, let's say, for companies, if two people are there applying for same positions, having similar qualifications, I don't you think that it should be the other way around, that the disabled people, knowing the fact that they have both equal qualifications, the disabled should be given the chance prior, because then they require some special treatments, and the other one should be avoided. But the case is directly opposite to it in general context, right? People neglect them and give the special treatment to other people. That is what I feel. So why does this exist? Like, how can we ensure that this should not be the case? We should actually provide the special treatment to the disabled ones, and just the normal people will fight for themselves and they will do it either ways, but then they are the ones who need that platform, right? So I don't know how do I explain these to my people, like fellows around us. So it'd be really helpful if you could explain.
Thank you, Neha. Very valid question, a dilemma that all of us face, especially in countries like ours, right? So the thing is, we're not talking about special treatment. So let's break down, okay? If you don't mind, I'll break down your question. One is about helping. It is okay to help. It is okay to help anyone, but you have to help only if the person needs help, only if the person asks for help. Say, for example, when my husband was living, he used a wheelchair, and he used a motorized wheelchair. And people, out of very good hearted people all over the world, wherever we go, would offer to push it, would not even offer, would push it. He would be somewhere, and then people would push it, and then he would have to turn back and say, please don't push. I have a motorized wheelchair, I will fall if you push. So you have to be very conscious when you're helping. Does this person need help? So the decent thing, the best thing, especially with disability, because in disability we talk about independence and personal choice. So it's always okay to ask, do you need help? Do you need assistance? Can I help you? And then if they say no, I can manage on my own, you have to respect that, because that is that person's independence, that is that person's dignity. You have to respect that. So that is about help. If anybody needs help, you help. And then about this special treatment. So Neha, this is why the CRPD talks about reasonable accommodations. We don't call it special treatment. We can't give special treatments to anyone. So the ideal situation should be a level playing ground where, whether irrespective of the fact that I live with a disability or not, whether I come from Sri Lanka or not, whether I come from the USA or not, whether I have an education or not, I should be having the same opportunities in society to realize my full potential. So this is what the CRPD talks about. Give reasonable accommodations so that we create a level playing field for everyone. People with disabilities then would not need special provisions. So if a person with a disability is denied the right to education, there is no level playing field. This is why special accommodations have to be made in the employment structures, where, say, for example, in Sri Lanka, there is a public administration circular which says 3% of government employment should be given to people with disabilities. So this is prior. This is why we have quota systems in our countries in terms of political participation. This is why we have a 25% quota for local government elections in Sri Lanka. Because there is no level playing ground for women, we are giving more opportunities through the law for women to contest and come forward as leaders so that they can work hard and work towards this level playing ground. Yes, so the special treatment we call reasonable accommodations. Laws can be made, special accommodations can be made so that everyone comes to the same levels, everyone has the same opportunities in an equal ground. Am I clear? Did I explain enough, Neha?
Yes, ma'am, you did, but I was still wondering that, let's say a disabled person and an able person is given the same platform, right?
Mhm.
There will always be chance that, the able person will override the disabled person, right? So I was just saying that instead of just leveling of the field, why cannot just we make them even in circumstances that they can have equal right for, everything, like as you said earlier that they require continuous guardianship and all, right? So if we gave them same opportunity of studying in same school, then obviously they will not be having that opportunity to get the right education that is needed to them, because then they will require some special attention, they will learn slow and they will require that kind of accommodations, right? So it's not fitting in my mind that if I send a disabled and able person to the same school it's obvious that disabled one will not learn as much as the able one will. So don't you think that it will make things more uneven rather than making it even?
I think, Neha, we are talking about the same thing, but in different ways, right? Maybe we could have this conversation offline as well.
Yes, yes.
But so yeah, so this is the thing. So these reasonable accommodations, affirmative actions which I spoke of, like quota systems, or yeah, especially quota systems like the government administration circular in Sri Lanka, or the 25% quota system in Sri Lanka for women. So these kind of affirmative actions are needed. They're definitely needed so that this is brought to a equal level. What is needed is not to be segregated when doing this. This has to be done in an inclusive environment where a person with a disability is not treated specially because of his or her disability, because we as a society have failed to give the accommodation. It's our fault. It's the society's fault. It's the government's fault. So we take responsibility and we take measures to correct it. So you have to look at it from that way, not from the other side of it. We are responsible, right?
Thank you for answering that, Ms. Lasanthi. Thank you, Neha, for your question. Niluka, or Niluka, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing your name right. I think you had a question as well.
Sorry,
Yeah,
Niluka.
thank you. Thanks. I'm Niluka. Thanks so much, Lasanthi, for that really helpful and informative presentation. I was just wondering, what can we do to ensure that persons with intellectual disabilities have access to independent or supported living? What can we do as a community to ensure that?
Hmm. I think, Niluka, there's a lot to be done. Niluka and I have been having these conversations for a long time, also, just for everybody to know. I think as a society, what we could do, I think, Niluka, you can disagree with me on this, but I think we should first start with awareness and sensitization. I think that is, at least in our country, that is one of the major steps that we have to take. And with awareness and sensitization, it is possible for most of these things to change. The way people think, the way people, treat, the way accommodations, the way laws and policies are made. So this plays a huge part. And also for us, I think us as individuals and us as organizations, to give more opportunities for people with intellectual disabilities to come forward and realize their full potential. Even though they have been deprived of education, give them opportunities otherwise, and make them especially part of, say, our advocacy movements, make them very strong parts, very visible parts, very visible in our advocacy movements. I think those would be very important for us to do. Niluka, any thoughts from you on that?
Yeah, no, I do think in terms of like, as you said, creating that conceptual difference where, how do we think about persons with disabilities, especially persons with intellectual disabilities, starting at that level of what our assumptions are, like you said, is really the base for a lot of the things we can do. And I appreciate how you mentioned in terms of disability movements as well, right? To have the full incorporation. I think most of the time it's the carers of persons with intellectual
Yes.
disabilities who become the voice
Yes.
for their children or siblings, but trying to change that so that there is opportunity, like you said, for self advocacy as well. So thank you so much for those amazing points.
Does anyone else have any more questions, guys? I think that is it.
That's it. I should have spoken more then. I thought there'd be more questions.
There isn't. All right, okay then. Thank you for the session, Ms. Lasanthi. Once again, thank you for accepting our invitation and being patient with us and answering all our questions. It truly means a lot.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for doing this. And I hope you will take this forward and do more work in this area.
I definitely hope to, Miss.
Yes.
I hope
Thank
everyone
you.
else will do so
Yes.
as well with the newfound information that they have found today.
Yes. And please call me Lasanthi, not Miss. Please.
Sure.
So that everyone would know. Okay. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you,
Thank
Miss.
you. All the best.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye.
Thank you for joining in, everyone. Have a good day.